G'day folks, Rod here from the Learn to Paint Academy. Welcome to this week's episode of Learn to Paint TV. This week I've got a dramatic scene for you of a headland which is down between Byron Bay and Ballina, which is the northern sort of coast of New South Wales here in Australia. Let me show you the photo. I was down there this time last year doing some painting, and I just got some amazing photos. So we've got this dramatic sort of headland here and crashing waves and so on. I love that spray of white foam against the darks of the rock face there. So we're going to try and replicate that. However, if you notice that the photo is a long, wide format, so more panoramic, we're going to need to make some modifications because I'm painting on a more of a squared off format here today, which I will show you as we get going. Now, as always here at Learn to Paint TV, we're going to use the Moore method of painting, and the Moore method of painting is a way of simplifying things right down. I'm going to take you through 3 steps, 3 colors, and 3 brushes. And I've taught this method to more than 35,000 students around the world and hundreds during our one-day workshops, and great results. So let me take you down to the palette and we'll show you where we start off. So I'm going to be using water mixable oils here today, predominantly French ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and yellow ochre will be my main 3 colors, and titanium white. And then we'll add, just as a booster color, some cadmium yellow light, some phthalo green, and possibly a little bit of the cadmium red there. I'm using water mixable oils, so I've got a little bucket of water here, and I also use some of this quick drying medium at times a little bit later on. In terms of brushes, I'm really literally going to use, pop that on the side, these 3 brushes here. So I tend to use synthetic flat brushes. These are Neefs, which we have these available in our new Learn to Paint shop. So large flat brushes, synthetic, they've got a nice sort of tension to them. And I've got a medium one and a small one. So that's probably predominantly 80 to 90% of my painting is going to be done with those 3. We'll add in a script liner brush here and there, and the odd palette knife or 2. Okay, so really simple setup, 3 basic colors, okay? French ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and the yellow ochre, and titanium white, and 3 basic brushes. And that'll give us 80 to 90% of what we need to do here today. Okay, on the board here, I've got a 12-inch by 16-inch piece of canvas just taped to the backboard, and we'll get underway. So the very first thing I always start off with is step 1 of the Moore method of painting, which is our drawing step. And this step is all about just getting the big shapes placed correctly onto the canvas. If we have a look at the photo just one more time, you can see the horizon line is very low, and we've got this big shape of the mountain, or the headland. It's coming out, more than the halfway mark, so that's important. And we're going to have to crop off the right-hand side a little bit, just because the format that I have with my canvas isn't quite going to work. So we'll keep that in mind as we go. So I'll start out by mixing up some blue and some of the alizarin crimson. Okay, we'll just get those 2 mixed together. And I'll use plenty of water here. My water's a little bit dirty, that doesn't matter. Plenty of water just to get that paint nice and loose. And for our step 1, our drawing, we want to keep that paint thin, right? Thin down. Now, I set it to a low horizon. The horizon line's running sort of around about there, through here. Okay, and then the ocean part sort of is back there a little bit. And in the foreground, we have this sort of shelf of rocks. So we'll just put in sort of some jagged rocks here and there. Okay, we don't want to overly emphasize those, so we'll play those down a little bit. Okay. Now, what we need to do is find this point here, around about there. There's a little bit of a rocky outcrop there, which is off in the distance. And then this comes up here. Now, we're not going to get this exactly, perfect, so don't fuss too much if you don't. Okay, and there's a couple of different layers of these headlands here. So I'm not going to get too concerned about not quite getting them exact. Okay. given that I'm going to be doing quite a bit of cropping of them anyway. So this here has some foliage at the top there. Then we've got this part that comes out through there. And then there's another sort of rock face just there. And there's a little bit of foliage on that. Okay, so all I'm doing is just trying to find the big shapes. And what I find is if you can break a subject down into half a dozen big shapes, then that will help you dramatically getting going with your painting. So we've got our sky as one shape, the water in here is going to be two, second shape, this rocky shelf, third shape, and then these headlands here become, you know, shapes 4 and 5 if you like. As I said, I'm going to simplify the headland down. I'm not going to try and get it exact. Just because we're doing a little demo here, not a finished painting. So there's a big sort of exposed rock face right there, which we might put some highlight on. And then we've got some rocky shelf in there, like so. And this area in here is where we want to have our dark, and we're going to have that splashing water. It's going to just be coming up there. So there's probably another little bit of rocky dark just in there as well. Okay, and a bit sort of there. Okay. So what you want to do is just make sure we've got a pleasing sort of shape in here, and we've got a good understanding of what it is that we're doing. There's a fair bit in this, so I will try and simplify that down as we develop this painting further. So basically the way I'm seeing it is we've got this one main part of the headland here, that's that part there, and then there's a secondary piece here, okay, which we'll put in some nice highlights right there, and then we've got a little third little headland there which runs out into that section there. Okay, so it's a little bit of a complex scene, a couple of layers there, but if you just follow through with me, then you shouldn't have too many problems getting an understanding of it. There's a little bit of cloud work and so on in the sky. We're not going to do too much with the sky. Most important thing is getting this focal area in here and this splash of water here. Okay, well that pretty much concludes step number 1. So friends, that concludes step number 1, which is our drawing step. As you can see, we've mapped in our big shapes here. Pretty simple approach. Now what we need to do is start to get an understanding of this painting by getting our darkest darks in and working progressively backwards from those darkest darks, and then we'll work into our lightest light. So this step number 2 is what I call the block-in step, just getting some color down and establishing the big masses with the right values. So let's get underway with that now. So now that we're coming to the block-in phase, it's important that we work with big brushes, not small brushes. And again, a little bit of water into that. We'll take some of this blue here. We'll just work into the mix I was using for the drawing. And what I want to do is find my darkest dark. So we're going to mix up effectively a chromatic black just by mixing in our 3 primaries, French ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and yellow ochre. Okay, we mix those together and we end up with well, it's sort of a dark brownish tone, which I don't mind. Now again, I want to keep this paint thin. Because I'm using water mixable oils, I want that paint to be fairly thin so I can work back over it. If you're using acrylics, you still want to keep it a little bit on the thin side, but you can always just let it dry off before the next step. Okay, so just getting that mix just right. It's what we call a chromatic black, even though it's not a pure black there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to treat this whole headland here as being this one value and tone. Okay, so we'll just block all of that in. Okay, and this is why it's important to use a big brush at this stage. Don't be fussing with a smallish brush. We'll just get some interesting shape into the edge there. And even this foliage, we can just use this one tone. So this is the shadow tone. Okay, we're going to apply paint over this, different layers to build this up. But for the moment, just think of this as being shadow. Okay. So you don't need any particular technique of how you use the brush here. Just scrub it on will be fine. Mix up a little bit more paint. Get a little bit of variety just by slightly different mixes. Now you don't want to paint it too thin because then we're going to have to go back over it when we do the next step. But at the same time, the paint's got to be thin enough. So because I'm using water mixable oils, basically what we want to have happen is that water component of it to dry out before we move on to the next, step 3. And I painted that fairly thin, so I'm pretty confident that that will happen. Okay, so now we've got this next step here and then a next step there. So we can basically use the same mix here, but 2 things need to happen. One is we need to lighten it slightly, so we'll get a little bit of the white in there. Okay, so that'll lighten it slightly. It also needs to just be cooler in tone, so a little more blue, pushing it just slightly towards the blue side, and it should have a definite shift. Okay, it should be a different tone to this one. Okay, we'll get some of that foliage up there. And as you can see, it is definitely lighter and cooler. And what will happen is as we start to place in these headlands here with the right value, assuming we get the value right, then we'll start to see a little bit of depth and separation start to occur. Okay, and what we're really just doing is just applying a basic understanding of aerial perspective. Something that we teach a lot at the Learn to Paint Academy. You see, I've got a bit too much water in there. Yeah, we focus a lot on aerial perspective. If you're doing landscapes and seascapes, then it's an important thing to understand. And the reason why it's important, I might just make a little bit more of this headland here. The reason why it's important is if we're painting landscapes and seascapes, we're effectively trying to capture a 3-dimensional world on a 2-dimensional surface. So how do we give it that illusion of depth and volume in a painting? Well, the way to do that is to utilize the principles of aerial perspective. And I've just shared with you one there. As things move back into the distance, they lighten in value, and they also tend to cool off in value. Now, every rule or principle can be broken, but generally speaking, it's a good understanding to have about what happens in nature. Okay, I'll just strengthen that back up. Just had a little bit of that dribble there was causing it. Okay, so now you can see we've got very definite jump back to that second headland there. And now we need to get this third headland in. And this third headland is only a little sneaky peek of it. We don't want to make too much of it, right? So we'll just get a little bit lighter again. And we want a bluey grey effectively for this one. Okay, so I'll just take some of that grey there. And so again, it needs to be lighter in value. And it needs to be cooler. That's probably too dark. It's cooler, but it's too dark. Okay. Let's have a look at that. Still probably too dark. I want to create a definite jump back to that one. We've got a subtle jump here. So having more of a definite jump backwards to the more distant one, I think makes sense. Okay. Now, if I don't get my shape exactly right at this point, I'm not going to fuss too much because we have another opportunity to come in and just reshape the edges. But with any of these sort of elements like this, it's really edges and overall shape that tell the story. So if you're looking at like a tree with foliage, the shape and the outer edges is what really tell you that it's a tree and what type of tree it is. Okay, good. So now we've got now three very definite and distinct pieces of headland there. That's probably a little bit grey. I might warm that up a bit as we progress the painting, but at this stage, you know, we'll sit with it and just see how it turns out. We don't want to play it up too much because it's really just background information. So it may actually end up okay, but we'll find out. Just need to get these rocky shelves in here now. I'm going to give my brush a bit of a clean. Okay, so now we want those rocky shelves to be a much warmer tone, and they've got to be dark. So I'm mixing a bit more of my yellow ochre and alizarin crimson here now, and some of the a little bit of the French ultramarine blue. Again, we want that paint to be thin. So no thick paint at this point. Okay, it just won't serve us to have our paint too thick. That's probably even too thick. I need to thin that down a bit. Okay, we'll put some mid-tones and highlights onto that at the appropriate time. Maybe another little rock in the next step, and that'll just start to bring that to life a bit more. Now I'm just going to change the tone a little bit by a little bit more blue into it, which will just darken it a bit more. Okay, don't fill it all the way through. You want the eye to be able to wander in to the subject here. Okay. Maybe get it a little bit bluer just in this section in here. The bluer will make it darker, but that's a good thing. We want dark in that corner. Maybe a touch in there. Okay, so now we get it, because this is warmer, it feels like it's more forward, closer to us than this information in the background here, which is exactly what it is that we want. Let's give you a brush, a little bit of clean. Let's have a look at that photo and just consider that water. So it's a bluey grey, the water, little hint of green here and there. Okay, so we don't want to take it too literally, the information we see in the photo. We're going to vary it up a bit. So we will, I'll take my palette knife just to do the mixing here. I'll take some titanium white, and then we'll grab some of this blue. So that'll give us our base. But you can see that's just not the right tone, is it? So I could get a little bit more grey into it just to grey it back a bit. And maybe we'll put that out the back, that tone. But then I think a little bit of yellow into the edge of it there will probably help our cause. Okay. So sometimes when I want cleaner colours and I want to really be able to consider the colours, I will, you know, take the knife and just help me with the mixing. So clean out the brush because I had that red in there. You can see how much of that's coming out there. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfectly clean, but I want to try and just get as much of that out as I can. And then let's get back into the water here to thin that paint. Now, may need to be just a touch darker, get a little bit more of that grey. Okay, let's see how we go with that. Come up to our horizon line here, and let's just pop that in. Good opportunity to reshape the bottoms of any of these. Now I've got a little bit of a dribble there because I've got a fair bit of water in, so I'll just with a bit of paper towel, we'll just pull that out. Reload the brush. Okay, this is going to work because the sky will be a lighter tone at the horizon. So that'll give us a good bit of separation. Don't be afraid just to blur the bottom there. Get a little bit more of that green tone. Okay. Not quite enough paint mixed up. It's often I find with the knife I do tend to undermix the amount of paint that I need, so if I grab it with a brush then I get a bit more pigment. Okay, that should be enough now. Just got to be careful I don't clip into that rock there because it's wet. That's why I like these Neef brushes, because they're stiff but they're also just pliable enough for me to be able to just, with the right amount of pressure, I can just work around things. And you can see I've created some interesting shapes along the top there of that rock. Just taking our time as we work around these rocks. And again, I don't mind blurring the bottom edges there. Okay, looking good. So this always leaves me the question of whether I might just put a little bit more of that yellow ochre tone into that water. Go slightly thicker in the paint, a little bit less water, a little touch of water, but not as much, right? I'll just start to run in some yellow ochre just to get a little bit green of that water here and there. Okay, now we'll come back in and we'll work back over that that whole water area, but just to get a bit of a feel of the water not being quite so deep in that part as it is out on the horizon there. So this brings up the question, do we tackle the sky at this point or do we not? And we leave it till a bit later on in the later stages. In this particular case, I'm going to leave the sky because I'm going to use it to come in and reshape this foliage. And I just want this paint up in here to just be fully dry. So we're going to call that the end of step 2. And we'll take a little break and then we'll come back for step 3. Okay, folks, well, we're going to pause there. That's the end of step 2. As I said, sometimes I'll do the sky as part of step 2. Other times I'll do it as part of step 3. In this case, I just want to cut back into some of the headland shape there. So I want that paint to be dry. So if you're using acrylics, within 20 minutes, this will be fully dry. If you're using oils or water mixable oils and you've used thin paint, as I've demonstrated here, then we should be good to go in half an hour with this. So this is a time where I normally go and have a cup of tea, go for lunch, whatever, and then come back, and then we can work back over it with step 3. Now in step 3, we slow down and we start to bring the painting to life with more mid-tones and highlight tones and a few details, and that'll bring the painting to life. So let's have a break, and I'll see you shortly for step 3. Okay folks, welcome back. We're now going to do step number 3 of the Moore method of painting, which is all about starting to bring this painting to life, adding in our mid-tones and our highlights and then some details to finish off the painting. So let's get back underway. So first thing we want to do is get in some of this green in here, and then we've got these rocks through there. So just get some of that green and a bit of foliage established. I'll use my big brush for that, and we'll just mix a mid-tone green. We don't have to go for our lightest green just yet, so we'll start off with some blue and some of this yellow ochre here. Okay, you can see we've got a sort of a middle value green. It's not a dark, but it's also not the lightest highlight that we could get in there either. We'll come to that, the lightest highlight, of course. And I'm just trying to look there to see where that sort of grass area comes through to about there. And then it rises up here, and then we've got foliage up there. So a little bit of a flat top there. And look, one of the things is when you get to this stage, we put that dark underpainting there for a reason. We don't want to lose that completely, okay? So we want to maintain some of that underpainting. And just by virtue of the tooth on the canvas, if I drag the brush across, it will sort of pull the paint off unevenly and leave some of that dark to shine through, which is what we want. It sort of rises up through about there. So you can see plenty of that shadow tone poking through there, creating a nice little effect. Then we've got this foliage here. Now this foliage, I'm going to push it a little bit more on the warmer side. So I'll get a little bit more yellow ochre into my mix here, and just a pinhead of that red, and we'll just warm it up like so. I'm using a little bit of the oil in there. And just working to get that right mix, something like that. And then what we'll do is, there's sort of like a brackeny sort of bush, I guess, coastal sort of feel to it. So we'll just make some marks for it. Get it a little bit warmer. Okay, and I'll come back to my green tone. We'll just run that into there. Like so. Okay, we'll leave that there. Now this second headland here is going to have a little bit of green at the top running into there, but then we're going to have this exposed rock. So we can't use the same green, so we'll add a little bit of white into that mix and a little bit more blue. Okay, so it's going to be a shift in the green. It's still going to be a green that we're dealing with, and we can brighten it up if we need to, but this one here, it looks like it comes down that way and down to about there. And they've got this exposed rock in here, which we'll address. But you can see there's a shift in the green. It's a lot lighter. Okay, a little bit of dry, brackeny sort of grass out, or foliage out there as well. So we'll just mix up a little bit of that. Just out in sort of that area there. Okay, this one in the background here, I don't know that we're even going to, maybe a touch of a lighter green. We'll just pop it in here. Get that a little bit bluer. Let's just run some of that in here. Okay, good. Now we've got these rocks in here. I want to keep these reasonably dark and put some sunlight sort of catching on to that area in there. So I'll just clear that brush clean and get a slightly darker tone happening. And we'll come back into this mix here. Okay, something like that, I feel. And just going to start to just strengthen up this area in here. Again, my objective is not to paint out what we've already put in there, but just to add some more tone and variety and let some of that original shadow tone come through. We'll get a little bit bluer up this end here because it's just cool it off in that section. But yeah, just to get a little bit of variety into there. Okay. And just looking at where that wave's breaking, it's right here. So I might, just for the getting a feel for the painting, let's put out some fresh white paint. So just take a smaller brush here, could use my palette knife as well. We'll just load up the tip of that brush, like so. And then we'll come in here and we'll go, okay, we want this light against the dark there. So let's just... Now, of course, there's wet paint there I'm putting this over, so I'll just pull a bit of the paint out with some paper towel, reload with fresh paint. This is how you get your clean colours. Okay, and we'll just put some of that there like that. Seeing as I've got the light on the brush, I'll just pop in a little bit more. Move it in the water there. Okay, let's now come in and we'll look at this rock face here. I will use the palette knife for this rock face. So we'll get a chunk of that white there. Okay, we'll get some yellow ochre and we'll get some alizarin crimson. Mix those two together. We just want to get that sort of dramatic effect of sunlight catching. So I'm just going to scrape up a bead of paint along there. That's what I really want. And we're going to come down to here. And the palette knife will just enable us to work that on in a way where the paint breaks up, like so. So just clip that little edge there, a bit of light. Now, we'll just darken that tone, a little bit more of the red and the yellow. So less white. Now I'm just going to use a little bit of artistic license here and just add in some highlight here and there. a small space, so I might just grab a small brush. Okay, I'm just going to add in a few more little bits of highlight there. Now I'm just doing this fairly rough, fairly loose. If I would slow down and take a bit more time with it, then it would have more impact, obviously. Okay, now I'll take a lighter tone and just mix it into that dark so that we get a lighter version of the dark, and then we can start to add in just some lights in amongst these rocks here. Not too much, just here and there. And that just helps to give it a little bit of variety and create a bit of form work in those rocks. Like so. Okay, now this area here is not quite right. I'll just come back to that darker dark. I'll just push back up into that. Just a little bit too much of that highlight tone there, I feel. Because I need to keep that effect of that dark tone against the white splashing water. So to make that water really pop out, the dark is pretty important there, yeah? Okay. Just working back into these darks in this secondary part of the hill line there. And work that in. Okay, let's get in there. Get a little bit of work into these rocks out here. Just lighten that tone back. After you get a bit of experience with mixing paint, you sort of can do it intuitively, but when you're just starting out, it's good to know the basic principles of aerial perspective and so on, so that you can mix the right tone. But see how I've just mixed that up? I've had a lot of thought, but it's sitting back further than these rocks in here. There's less, you can see I've just did a test mark there just to show you how light it is against this. So same sort of rocks, but just that they're further away. So we need a lighter value there and less saturation in that paint. Okay. Going to just grab a little bit more of that highlight tone and run part of it into there. That sort of gives that a bit of a focal point on that rock face and against this splashing water here. Get a little bit more foam. Okay, I'll get a little bit more life into here now. So what I want to do now is just get a little bit more power into some of those greens in that foreground hill. So I've got my cadmium yellow light here. I'll get a little, tiny little bit of the phthalo. See how the phthalo just overpowers it there like that. So make sure you only use a tiny little bit of that phthalo. Get a little bit of that grey into it. Okay. I'm just using just a little touch of the oil there. And what I want is just a lighter patch in through here. Just down in there, just to separate those two. Okay, I'll run that down there a little bit more. Sort of a bush in there. I'll just put a slight indication of it, and I'll just pull some of that paint out. I don't want too much paint in the brush, because what I'm going to do now is just soften in parts. So I'm just going to pull the paint out of that brush, so it's a little bit less paint, and I'm just going to just soften in some of that highlight tone. So just so it's not jumping forward too much, but it's there enough to create the effect that we want. There we go. I'm just toning it back a bit. Some of that foliage in there, a little bit in there. Okay, let us now switch our focus and we'll get that sky in. And a nice clean brush. I'm going to keep that sky pretty light. There's not much happening in the sky at all, so we won't do much with it, but we'll take a big chunk of that white. See how much white I've got there? I'll pop it down here, just move my pot out of the way, get a little bit of oil, and we'll get some blue. And then I'll just start mixing that blue here. I won't mix into all the white just yet. Okay. So sky is the source of all the light, so therefore we want to keep it fairly light, but at the top it's going to be darkest. So let's just start off with our darkest tone for the sky. Scrub that in. Now don't worry about painting it too neat. See, I'm using a fair bit of force. The backboard's all jumping around there. Okay, and I've just lightened it off in the middle a bit, and we'll come down. Now see, I've got all those marks in here and so on. I'm not going to worry about trying to correct those just yet. I just want to get the paint down in roughly the right tone, and then I'll come back in and we'll do an operation of blurring it all together, blending it rather. all together. Now see, I'm quite happy to clip into some of that yellowy sort of foliage tone and drag some of that into the sky. I actually think that's a good thing. We don't want big blobs of it, but a little hint of it here and there. Same with the green. And just work it back into the sky. Just creates a bit of a connection point, echoing the colours there. Okay. Now my brush has got a little bit dirty, so it's probably not a bad idea for me just to give it a swish. But as we get this skying, it'll make more sense. The whole headland thing will make more sense, and we'll start to look more accurate. Now, should be pretty obvious that I'm not really following the photo that closely at this point. I only used it really just as the rough idea of what we were going to paint. But once I got the rough shape in, I'm of the opinion that, you know, the photo should just really be a launching pad. Once you get the rough shape down and you really start to get into your blocking and so on, you don't want to be referring back to the photo too much, because all your attention should be up on the painting itself. Okay, you can see it's a nice light sky. I'm just running out of the blue a little, so I'll just get a touch more. So as I put the sky in there, you can see how it's just reshaping a little bit that secondary headland there. Easy to do, especially because we let it all dry back a little bit after the blocking stage. Now I can come in here, just use the brush and just cut back into the shapes and just adjust them if they need to. Or tidy up, like a little bit of tidy up work that needs doing there, right? Now the edges on this distant one should be a little bit softer, less pronounced than the edges elsewhere. Okay, and then we come to our horizon line here. Just run that through. I'm just going to blur that waterline there, and a couple of those little edges in there just got a little bit too hard. All right, now I've got all the sky down. I can give my brush just the tiniest little bit of a clean with some of that water. Pull it through a paper towel on the brush. And then I can come back into this sky and just go, okay, let's just soften in any parts that are a bit messy. Like up in here, for instance, we just feather all that together. Now my sky has got fairly light, probably a little bit lighter than what I'd planned. So I'll just get some blue back into that white, and let's just strengthen up in here. I'm not going to overly blend it though, because I want to keep movement, a feel of movement in the sky. So I won't overly blend it. Probably need just a couple of little light grey accents in the sky, lower part of the sky. So I'll just mix in the blue and the red. Keep it fairly light though in value. Mistake would be to make that too dark. And then let's just come in here and just put in some shadowy tones in there. Same up in here. Just the sort of a hint of some, maybe some clouds starting to form. I haven't quite got there yet, but it's very, very subtle. I don't want it to be coming forward at all. So, soften the underneath of it. All right, let's get back into this water here. I'm not going to do much with the water actually. I'll just strengthen it up in a few parts. Just with some thicker paint here and there. See how we've gone with that mix. It's pretty close, similar value. So yeah, again, I don't want to over paint and lose all the painting I've done previously. So I'll leave some of that to come through, but just to get a little bit of thicker paint in there, it's looking a touch thin. In fact, it's not too bad. Probably just want a little bit more white water in there. So we'll echo this tone here along the top of the this rock face. So we get a little bit more of that red, a little bit more of the yellow ochre. Okay, a little touch of light white to lighten it. Something like that. So I'll just scoop up a chunk of that, and let's just come in here. Again, I don't want to lose the darks that we've already got established, but we can just get this rocky sort of shelf established here. A little bit on here. Okay, now if I overpaint it, like I've done a little bit there, I'm not entirely happy with it. I just want to point out to you not to get too concerned. So I'll just mix up that dark tone again. Because I'm using a limited palette of our basic red, yellow and blue, I can find that dark tone pretty quickly, or close enough to it. Okay, it's going to be something like that. So I've just gone a little bit overboard here. Now if I'm not exact when I come back in with these darks, I'm not going to be too concerned, because it just adds a little bit more interest into the shape. Okay, it's a good opportunity to strengthen that dark just underneath that rock face there. A little bit more there. It doesn't want too much more than that. All right. Get some more of this white on the tip of my brush. And let's just come in here and we'll just run in some white water into there. The seas were getting fairly turbulent around these rocks here, hence the big splashing section there. But we're going to be mindful of not overdoing it, as tempting as it is with this white water, because it's great to put it on. But we just got to be careful we don't overstate the white water here. Probably doesn't need much more than that, really. Just mixing up a bit more of a greenier tone for a few spots in here. Usually the water gets greener as it comes in closer to the shore. As the water gets shallower, the light goes through the water and it bounces off the sandy bottom or the rocks. And that pushes back out through to the blue and gives that effect of green. Strengthen up a little bit here. All right, almost there, I think. I'll just get a little bit more brighter green just in a few spots here. And I think we might call a halt to this one. It's a fun little demo, fun little painting to do. Captured the essence of the scene. We've got these nice foreground rocks here, looking back into this headland scene with the light on the escarpment. Well, there you go, folks. This is our little escarpment scene here that we've been working on. And the headlands here, we've got the first headland, the second one catching the light, the distant one here is breaking water against the darks, and these sort of stronger tones in the foreground. Fun little painting to do and worth having a go at. Now, I have to just stress, of course, that the photo is actually that way. I've cut off part and I've compressed it a little bit. So just be mindful of doing that when you have a go at this one. But this is a fun and enjoyable painting to do. Creating a little bit of depth and separation. So we're going to learn that, and creating a bit of atmosphere and mood in the sky and in the water. So have a go at this one and see how you go. Alrighty. Thanks very much for watching Learn to Paint TV. Now, if it's your very first time watching us, or if you haven't done so already, please go and register for our free course. I'll put the web address on the screen underneath me here. And come and check us out at the Learn to Paint Academy as well. And again, I'll put the web address up. And look forward to seeing you next week on Learn to Paint TV. Cheers for now.